Okay, so I just want to start off by saying that I'm a little bit nervous about teaching this class or leading this discussion, because I think maybe perhaps more than any other one that we've had together, I think there's room for, volatility in the discussion. I felt confident that we could do it. I'm not going to take any strong stands on any issue because there isn't really. That's the problem. The problem is when you have an issue that's not clear cut, yet people have very black and white perspectives and are deeply set in their ways, and that's where you have the potential for
like abortion.
Well, maybe, yeah. That's another. We can talk about that. I'm more comfortable talking about that.
No, but I mean, it became black and white sort of thing.
Right, and it isn't. It isn't. That's right. I have spoken many times about abortion in Jewish law, and it's even in Jewish law, like we get unfairly lumped together with the Christians and taking a very hardline stance when it's actually not that clear in Jewish law. And I'm sourced just a honest, an honest analysis of the sources makes that clear. That's also an example of something where there's no progress in debate if you just scream at each other till you're blue in the face. You don't nothing improves for anyone.
There's no learning process.
There's no learning, exactly. So this issue of religion and politics in Israel is maybe the most hotly debated issue in the Jewish world this past 100 years, perhaps. I think there's an argument that could be made. I think even today, they're having elections in Israel in a couple of months, and the same issues that have been present since the founding of the Zionist movement or the modern Zionist movement in the end of the 19th century, those same issues are still in place today. And if you go to the Israeli parliament, you see, I don't know if you've been to D.C., so you maybe go visit the Capitol and, see it's nice. And, people, you watch on C-SPAN, it's very nice how they give lectures, and every once in a while someone has a YouTube-worthy clip where they start streaming. You go to the Israeli Knesset, you feel like you walk into a zoo, literally.
That's right.
People are screaming at each other, they're clawing at each other. There's a great video. You can Google it, where they had an argument, and the woman, one of the Knesset members takes the cup of water and pours it on the guy's head. That happens in a civilized, parliament in Israel. Argument, takes the water, pulls it on his head, and anyhow, so that happens a lot, and a lot of the debate has very deep roots. The state and the current composition, they're dealing with a variety of issues, and none more divisive than what to do with the neighbors, the Arabs. And these things have very deep roots. So if you want to understand what happened, you read stuff about what happens in Israel. I don't know how active we are, or every individual here is about keeping up to date with the issues in Israel. But when you read things and you see such divergent opinions, it's interesting to learn at the roots of what brought about this state. You see that there was really different perspectives from day one, and I think those divisions are still in effect today. And it kind of, once you analyze it from big picture, you learn more, and you're more educated when it comes to Israeli politics in that scene.
Did you see Chaim Potok's The Chosen?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
Would that interest me?
It was a book. Wow.
I read all of Potok's books.
Huh?
I read all of his books.
Yeah, I saw the movie, and it's a very interesting movie because Zionism dates back a long, long time ago. And I've seen a lot of history with that back there, but not too many at this table remember Schneerson.
Yeah.
Rabbi from Chabad?
Yeah, you remember the Chabad with the Rebbe Schneerson. He was adamant that Israel will not be established until the Moshiach returns. But now that it has, there they are. They decided as long as Israel's there, we'll go. And so they're there.
Yeah, so we're going to talk more about the different responses to Zionism.
Still an issue.
That's absolutely correct. And I think that's maybe a good place to start, And we talked about Zionism and, the Dreyfus trial and how that spurred Herzl to develop this, modern idea, but it's actually not a new idea at all.
No.
The Torah itself, dating back to the Torah, we're talking about thousands of years, the Torah itself outlines this process of exile and redemption and eventually, the Jews coming back from all four corners of the world back to Israel. I have a cute little tidbit that I discovered. I don't know if I should even discuss it. What the heck, right? So there's this theory that was developed or that was discovered, and the accuracy of the theory is not something I'm going to vouch for, but there's been an ancient tradition that the Torah makes a lot of predictions, black and white predictions. You open the Torah, you see it says this and it says that, and it makes predictions, very bold predictions often. But there's been a tradition that contained within the Torah are basically the blueprint for history. So every event that happens, or at least every major event that affects the Jews, is foretold in the Torah before it even happens. That's been a tradition. Where it is, how to decipher it is that part is already up for discussion. So the famous Vilna Gaon, the Gaon of Vilna, the genius of Vilna, we mentioned him a few times. So he was a proponent of this. So they asked him, "Hey, where in the Torah are you mentioned? You're a famous rabbi, very impactful, probably the number one figure in the Jewish world in the 18th century. Where does it say you? Where does it say your name?" So he says to him, he said to him in the end of Parshas Kiseitze in Deuteronomy, it says, Evan Shlema v'tzedek yilcha. It's talking about the laws of having honest measurements. If you're going to sell someone a pound of bananas, and then you have a cube that equals a pound, don't shave off the corners. Make sure it's really a pound. That's what the Torah says. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah. When you have measurements and weights, you got to have fair measurements and weights. So it says Evan Shlem, which means a perfect stone. But he said that the word Evan is a variant of Eliyahu. The first aleph represents the Eliyahu, which is his name. And then Ben means the son, and Shlema, which means complete, but also it's the same letters as Shlomo, and his father's name was Shlomo. So it says that's where it says me in the Torah. Evan Shlema. Fine. Now, someone did the mathematics and realized that if you were to count from verse number 1 of the Torah, and you would basically you would give 1 year per verse in the Torah. So since Adam, so since the Jewish calendar begins, and the first verse corresponds to the first year, if you count up all the verses in the Torah all the way to the end of Kiseitze in Deuteronomy, it corresponds to the exact year that this rabbi died, 1797. Okay, maybe it's a shock or not. Maybe it's a surprise. I don't know. But then they discovered that if you look at, let's say, the date of the first temple being destroyed and the second temple being destroyed, and all these major cataclysmatic events, positive and negative, that happen to Jewish people, you find that the verses that correspond to the year that those events happen are often like eerily foretelling about those events. So I found that the years of 1945, 46, 47, 48, that is the verse that in the Torah where it says that the Jewish people come back to Israel. That's the verse. I'm like, whoa! I remember like a spine-tingling shot. Like, whoa! That's and I found other things like 1939, scary stuff. What it says about 1939, like the scariest verse in all Torah is in 1939 and 1940, 1941. Like, Anyhow, that's my little tidbit. So the idea of Zionism is a very ancient idea. Torah itself talks about it. The modern efforts to try to institute a state for Israel is, we know that this modern Zionism began in the 1890s, but in the 1825 there was a major effort to make a state for the Jews in Grand Island, like near Buffalo, New York. It's pretty cool. Like this little, tiny little island. That wasn't going to be the state for it. And there were other efforts as well over history. I remember that's one that I remember. So it's not a new idea. But for today's discussion, we're going to talk about Zionism in its most modern iteration with Theodor Herzl and the modern Zionist movement. So,
let me just ask.
Yes.
What took so long? What took so long for the Jews? Why did it take till the late 19th century for Jews to, gosh, maybe we should all go to Israel or establish a state? I mean, that seems so obvious to me.
So
Didn't the Holocaust expedite the process?
no one would argue that that's not true. But the movement predates it by 50 years. That's what he's.
Well, the Ottomans probably would have objected to part of their territory.
But I think that we overestimate how organized and unified the Jews were, and how practical it was. When the Jews were always yearning for a return to Zion. It's part of the prayer. It's part of the experience. Like it's been part of the Jewish framework and consciousness forever. We you open up the Jewish prayer book, half the prayer is about restoration of the Davidic line and sprouting of the redemption and rebuilding Jerusalem. Like that's the prayers. That's the we talk about the prayers that come after a bread meal, the three prayers, three daily prayers. That's been part of the Jewish psyche for thousands of years, really. There were efforts in the 13th century, like the Ramban. He made an effort to go there, and they established a small Jewish contingency. You can still see today the Ramban synagogue in the Old City. The four ancient Old City synagogues, all subterranean, because the Muslims said it has to be underground. Muslims, my good friends. All Jewish houses of prayer had to be underground because the Muslims said no, it can't even be overground. It has to be built like a subway system. So there were efforts in the 13th century. The aforementioned Gaon of Vilna, he started on a trip to go to Israel. Eventually he went back. It's a huge debate as to why he set out for the trip and then ultimately decided against it and went back. He's started the journey but then went back. Contingency of his students, they actually went to Israel. So there were always some Jews in the 19th century that were in Israel. We know that there was a first wave. The first wave of Aliyah happened, I think, in the 1880s. So yes, I think that we underestimate how forgotten, I think, on a geopolitical scale, Israel was. So it was close to the Jewish heart, but as a practical matter, it was barren. It was desolate. There was nothing going on there. There was no civilization of any no civilization of any sort, but no mass civilization there. There was nothing going on there for 2,000 years. It was empty. It was barren.
I read recently the Promised Land. He was here for the book fair. I forget his name, but his grandfather was one of those that went over in the 1880s and started over. Did you remember the book, The Promised Land?
Yeah.
Anyway,
So what's
Very
going on in
interesting.
Israel today?
Well, we'll get to Israel today. No, but I think when we learn more about, let's talk about the founding of Zionism. So when you see the emergence of Zionism, it explodes in popularity in the 1890s. Obviously the dynamic figure is Theodor Herzl. He's a assimilated Jew from Vienna. He's really tall, really handsome. He's got a massive. He looks like a hipster. A massive jet black, beard, and he was someone who was, we could say, very distant from traditional Jewish values or Jewish knowledge or Jewish learning or Jewish practice. He himself couldn't speak Hebrew. In fact, when he wrote the book in 1897 or 1895, whenever he wrote it, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, he proposed that the official language of the state should be German. He didn't speak Hebrew. He himself had a circumcision and a bar mitzvah, but his one son, Hans, he gave neither. Because that was the state of Jews. He was an assimilated Jew. He was ignorant in traditional Jewish matter. And that was commonplace, especially a place like Vienna, like this, this elitist kind of, highbrow Western European, assimilated Jewish hub.
But something caused him.
What's the point? What's the point of going to Israel and
So-
If you don't even care, like if you don't even care in your daily life, why are you going to go build a state somewhere else?
So I think when we analyze Herzl, it's important for us to realize that even though his kind of, from a traditional perspective, he wasn't very Jewish or active in his Jewish, but he was very Jewish, And I think as his plan took off, like he embraced it, he was adored by Jews everywhere, despite the fact that he was an outsider basically. But he was a great visionary, very charismatic, very energetic. Like he invested his life and his sizable family fortune and all of his energies into making this dream a reality.
His family descendants all screwed up.
Yeah, we'll get to the details.
Mental illness, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so it was it's somewhat of a tragic epilogue to this story. So this guy, Theodor Herzl, he was a journalist. And he was actually very bothered by the quote Jewish problem, the fact that we're like an identityless people, we're hated basically wherever we are, we're marginalized in every which way, and he proposed as recently as 1890. He proposed mass conversion to Christianity. Just the who are we dealing with here? So he had written. We have we have his complete diaries that were published, and he has written as recently as 1890 that the only way for the Jews to be accepted and to not be tormented and not be persecuted was that all young Jews have a mass conversion to Christianity. He even writes about like we're going to make a parade. And all the princes and all the church members are going to be there. It's to be a massive ceremony. Like means he was pompous and grandiose in his visions for everything. But this was a problem that bothered him. But his solution to the problem, varied greatly. So he starts off proposing mass assimilation, and then due to what happened in the Dreyfus trial, I'll talk about the Dreyfus trial in a second. He says the only solution is not. Assimilation won't work. The only solution is to build our own state and therefore to have autonomy over our land. That was the idea. So what happened with the Dreyfus trial? Alfred Dreyfus was a French military captain who was wrongly accused of treason, of aiding the Germans, giving them military secrets. They forged documents. They fabricated evidence. That part's absolutely clear. And in 1895, he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, what was clear to the people, Herzl was a reporter, and he was a reporter reporting on this massive trial that was going on. Treason's a big deal. And he noted, he saw what was happening. They were parading Dreyfus through the street, and they were all screaming, "Death to the Jews! Death to the Jews!" Now remember, in France in the end of the 19th century, the Jews weren't like the Jews are today. They weren't as dynamic and and didn't have a community. It wasn't like that. In France, the assimilation was to such a degree that the rabbis all dressed like priests. The prayer services were held on Sunday. There was assimilation had reached peak assimilation in France, yet the anti-Semitism was booming. And he knows hey, we are doing all the assimilation. We've reached peak assimilation. There's nothing else for us to assimilate. There was at that time in the 19th century, there were only 500 Jews in France that we would label as Orthodox or observant. That's it. Out of the probably hundreds of thousands of Jews, that's it. means the dream of assimilation and being accepted by the greater society, that was there, and yet we weren't accepted. So Herzl realized that this is not going to happen. So that's where he developed this idea of Zionism. Now, what eventually happened with Dreyfus was that there was this great Gentile journalist who had written a book. I don't know how to pronounce it in French, but it's like the letter J, which means like I. J'accuse, thank you.
Zola.
Yeah, exactly. Emile Zola, exactly. So he wrote this book accusing, going through the evidence and saying he was accusing them of mistreating Dreyfus, and eventually he had a retrial and he was reinstated. And that's the epilogue to that story. But this started the movement that basically changed the face of Jewry. Now, I like to point out, just as a historical pattern, we find many, many times in history that redemption or changes in the identity of the Jewish people for the positive don't necessarily come from the most likely of sources. The Jews and the rejection and the opposition that we'll see to Zionism, part of it was for the fact that people were questioning, hey, is this really the movement led by these people? These are the people that are going to contribute to the Jews coming back to Israel? Like, to them, it was just bizarre to see that someone like Herzl, who stood for everything that traditional Jews were wary of, he's going to be the number one pivotal figure that's going to usher in this new era of Jews being back in Israel. To them, it was they were bewildered by that. Is that really possible? I have a great quote here. I snapped a picture of it instead of bringing the book. I'll see if I can find it. Apologize for the here. This is from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen Rabinowitz, one of the opposers to the Zionist movement. And this is a translation. We surely know that if we were believers and truly trusted in the salvation of the Lord and were observers of the commandments of God, we would even today be dwelling in our holy land. Why did the land perish? Because they abandoned my laws, which I put forth them. That's the quote from the scripture. It has already been made clear that the Zionists reject all the commandments and cleave to every manner of abomination. It may be assumed that if the Zionists gain domination, they will seek to remove from the hearts of Israel belief in God and in the truth of the Torah. They have thrown off their garments of assimilation and put on a cloak of zeal so that they appear zealous on behalf of Judaism. They are in fact digging a mine beneath our faith and seek to lead Israel from beneath the wings of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So this kind of like underscores or that typifies the response that a lot of people had to Herzl and his clan being kind of, these are the people that are going to lead the the revival of Jewish sovereignty in Israel. Yes.
The assimilation of the Jews in Europe, but is it also in other parts of the world as well?
Oh yeah, of course. Like in the United States, the assimilation was also had reached its peak basically then. Assimilation, we talk about, let's say, the Jewish responses to the Enlightenment. So that's really like the 19th century was probably in all of Jewish history was probably the most detrimental in like absolute numbers and in Jewish people disaffiliation from Judaism and kind of rejection of Jewish identity, of Jewish culture, of Jewish life, of Jewish practice. Yeah. Well, not necessarily. I would say worldwide. I'd say primarily United States and in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, and kind of what we would call probably the less sophisticated parts of the Jewish world, that was less of a that was less of a trend. Yeah.
I'm curious about what you described as Herzl's evolution, so to speak, from mass conversion to rejecting that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I understand your point about the assimilation still seemed to, there was no lack of anti-Semitism with all these, but they were still Jews, and everybody knew they were still Jews. If everybody had converted, if that had actually gone into effect, where was the fear there? if it would have been carried out to the degree that he seemed to want to originally.
Maybe I'm saying, would that have worked?
Second or third generation, I've seen it many times.
What's that?
Second and third generation.
No, I
By
understand.
that time, people will forget that your parents were Jewish.
But the question here, your question is, hey, what would have happened if mass assimilation on that scale of conversion,
Right.
Would have happened? Who knows? I'm saying, Hitler dialed back the clock. He didn't care if someone converted
No,
to
I
Christianity.
understand, but even Hitler, as we all know, the Nuremberg laws had distinctions between half Jews and Michelangi or whatever.
Right. But to him, he was worried about the Jewish soul, irrespective of whether or not they converted. So who knows what would have
I was
happened?
just wondering, did Herzl actually analyze it to that degree?
I don't know. I haven't read. I read the quote from his diary. I didn't read the diary itself. I don't know. I'm not such an expert. It's a good question, But what we see clearly is that he felt that the efforts of fixing the Jewish problem, quote unquote, via assimilation was tried and attempted, and what else could you do when you assimilate the entire country of France, and yet anti-Semitism, was rampant.
Well, that's why I specifically distinguished between mass conversion and assimilation.
Listen, in the 19th century, we have a 250,000 Jews converted to Christianity. That's a huge deal. Today, it's not. I'm saying it's still a problem where you have Christian missionaries, especially in Israel. But you don't have a 250,000 Jews converted to any other religion.
Right.
You have a problem of Jews not being involved, or kind of checking out of the synagogue and the Jewish life or whatever. That's a much bigger problem. But think about it: 250,000 Jews. That was tried. It wasn't on a global scale, but on a massive scale, it was tried. And what did that bring to the Jews? Did it bring the respite that they were hoping for? I don't know. I think the argument can be made that it didn't. So I think I think we can look back and kind of see, yes, he probably realized that. Listen, it's not working.
Is it 250,000 Jews in this country?
No, global, but probably more in Europe, because the Jews, the first waves of masses of Jews coming to America was the Russian and the German Jews in the 1880s. So it's kind of late in the game. But I think German Jews was hugely popular in Germany to convert to Christianity and just settle the matter. In France, Austria, Belgium, all those places. That was a big trend in the 19th century, and it didn't work according to Herzl.
On an individual level, especially in Eastern Europe, once you converted, this incredible pressure you and your family or environment experienced from the militant anti-Semitism is gone. You're done, just like that, because now you're Christians. That's it. And that's why I said, especially in the second and third generation. That's why conversion at the time, in modern time, probably analog would be economic refugees to come to this country or to Western Europe, because once you make it over the hurdle, you accept. You're not an outcast, or you're not staying out.
Yeah, you do see some examples of people that converted to Christianity that kind of made it big. Like I think Karl Marx converted to Christianity. Him.
He converted to communism.
Well,
I
yeah.
don't think he was Jewish, but did he have?
I think he got baptized. No, I think so. Pretty sure he did.
Who's the guy in Chicago?
Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of Britain.
The guy who died of a brain tumor, Chicago reporter. No, he was Bob.
Novak.
Bob Novak.
Novak was
to
Jewish,
Christianity.
but he was anti-Israel.
Yes, I know that.
But Disraeli, even though his father and his grandfather were converted.
Yeah,
So
I'm
he was
saying
raised Christian, but he
That's
was
right.
still considered a Jew, and he was called a Jew by the press and by commoners.
I think that
Really accepted.
especially at the beginning of the Enlightenment period, when the Jewish people are finally afforded the opportunities socially and economically, to actually let their wings soar. There was a tremendous pressure. You couldn't make it. They felt probably, in the great society if you still had the label of being a Jew. I think like today in America, the Jews are very successful. I think that pressure means. I think what contributed to the explosion in conversion to Christianity in the 19th century was more than just kind of not being labeled as a Jew, but also for economic and social concerns.
We had plenty of stuff even in my lifetime. I went to Temple University School of Medicine 2 years before I started. So that was, I started in 63. 1961, they broke the quota. It was 10% per year of Jews before that. 2 years after me, it was 3/4 Jewish. But our class was about 25% Jewish. But yeah, we had quota for years. And some of the med schools were started because the Jews had quotas. The one in New York, Flower Fifth, and Chicago College of Medicine. And then osteopathy sort of came out of the blue from the Italians and Jews in the turn of the 1800s. There's plenty of stuff. People couldn't get jobs. In New Jersey, we looked into this area called Lake Mohawk. A lot of pilots lived and all that. And my wife asked, this was in 1974. My wife asked, where's the nearest synagogue? They said, it's way down, They said, but you don't have to worry because there's another Jew living in the town. It was started by Germans. It was a Nazi Bund area. So that stuff happened up to,
When I was growing up, there were whispers that Lenin, the famous
Jewish, yeah.
no, that his grandfather was Jewish. He was one of those who converted.
Yeah.
Whispers. Imagine like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the founder of the state,
Well, Trotsky.
Trotsky.
Jewish period.
Yeah.
And,
And Marx
whole-
obviously was
whole
more
bunch
Jewish.
of his cohorts, but
Yeah.
you cannot have a founder of the state and demigod be of Jewish descent. It was not officially condoned.
Wasn't there a lot of Jews who converted to Lutheranism?
He was one of the worst anti-Semites.
Yeah, he was terrible. He was a terrible anti-Semite.
He wrote
Yeah.
about 95 pieces.
Well, he originally tried to court the Jews. but-
Right. Initially, he was very.
Yeah.
He loved them.
In the beginning, he was very friendly.
And they only changed about 10 years ago, or 20 to 15 years ago, to the Lutheran Church.
Yeah.
Discount that.
Anyhow, so
Windows change people.
back to Herzl. So Herzl, the idea spreads like wildfire. So we already have in 1897, only 2 years after the Dreyfus trial, we have the first Zionist Congress in Basel, and we have this very I would say like polar opposites, kind of the mix of people that were the big the big movers and shakers, not the movers and shakers, but the strength and the power behind the movement was basically a mix of people kind of in the Herzl mode or mold, who were sophisticated, elitist, aristocratic, assimilated, intelligent Jew, like the intelligentsia of Jews that were, have this vision of what they call the new Jew. How it's, everyone's going to be wearing top hats and they'd be sprawling, like this a utopian vision of what this land's going to look like, and without any shred of of having kind of the nationalist or the traditional perspective of what it means to return to Zion. And then the other half is the simple traditional religious Jews, who, by the way, Herzl called his army of schnorrers, which I love that. Schnorr is like Yiddish for a beggar. Yeah, that's what Herzl called them. He's that's what he called it, his army of schnorrers, which is the simple kind of the the Eastern European Jews who they've been yearning for such an idea, and they really believed in the heart of hearts that this was kind of the fulfillment of all the prophecies. And they were also there. That's what it is, and that's basically, I think, when you look at it today, even today, the Zionism and Israel and what it means to be a citizen of the state, and what's the mission statement of the country. I think it's kind of split still along those lines. You have the idealists, and that's the people who don't want to give up a little small quarter inch of the land, and you have even the people that say we want the Eastern Bank as well. We want it all. Like we're kind of going back to the Davidic times, and this is kind of reestablishing what it was, and bringing back the glory of Israel from yesteryear. And then you have kind of the secular Zionism, which is it's about having a state and just having a way to like this is our place, let us govern it like any other country. And, it doesn't have to be not temper down all that super Jewish thing, and and that's that. Herzl proposed to have the state in Uganda. He was offered to him, and that made tons of sense. To him, he threatened to quit the Zionist movement. By the way, in 1905, he threatened. He said, "I'm out if we don't." Because to him, this was a fulfillment. It doesn't matter where is it in Palestine? Is it in Africa? Who cares? You have a plot of land. Let's go build a state.
Yeah, it's spoken as a Jew without Torah.
Yeah, but I think that's the kind of illustrative of the perspective of the secular Zionists.
Yeah.
Let's have a state. It doesn't matter where it is. It's nothing to do with biblical Israel or biblical Palestine or going back to back to our roots and fulfilling all that we've been praying for, going back to the Western Wall, maybe building the temple and all that. No, it was about having a state. That was his big deal. And that kind of understood, I think, the kind of the two forces that existed within early Zionism.
Primarily secular group.
So I would say like the leadership was all secular, but I think the masses, the support that it had amongst the masses, the grassroots, was primarily the traditional, the religious, the observant, the Eastern European, the army of Schnorrs.
People from the shtetl.
From the shtetl, exactly. Now, like you said, Herzl had a tragic epilogue. He dies 44 years old in 1904. So I guess he threatened to quit earlier. Okay. He had 3 kids. His name, the kids were Pauline she was the one who had mental illness and she died. And then his son Hans converted to Christianity. But then he came back, but then he committed suicide. His last daughter was killed in the camps, and his only grandson, who changed his name, whole story behind him, he came to the United States and he found out that his whole family was destroyed. His mother died in the camps. And he also committed suicide after converting to Christianity. So yes, it's kind of like a very sad and tragic ending.
What I read, they said the mental illness is on the mother's side.
Yeah, and his wife Julie. There are those that even question whether or not she was even Jewish. There's significant evidence that she wasn't even Jewish. And to Herzl, it was no big deal.
So what happened to her? His wife?
Oh, she died in 1907. She died only a few years afterwards.
Right after him. Or a couple
Yeah, but they were also estranged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but Herzl after this first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, he declared, "I have today, we founded the state of Israel." I don't know when he says, "I don't know when it will actually, when it will actually come to fruition. I don't know if it's in 5 years or 50 years, but today I founded the state of Israel." That's what he declared, and actually 50 years and 9 months later, the state of Israel was actually founded. So his impact cannot be underestimated. But I think when we talk about kind of the roots of the religious tension that exists or that has existed within Israel, I think we start from there. In opposition to Zionism, the opposition to Zionism was fierce and also had two different camps. So we talk about Zionism as having basically the secular Zionist camp and the religious Zionist camp that still exists today to some degree. The opposition to Zionism also had its 2 camps. We have the religious opposition to Zionism, and we have the secular opposition, or the reformed and assimilated Jews, and they had very, very fierce opposition to Zionism. I think it's also important to realize that, a pattern that we see again in Jewish history is that new ideas are always treated very warily. Jews are very don't hastily embrace new ideas. Innovators have a very hard time making their inroads in the Jewish world. We have this perspective like, hey, we've been doing it for a while. We kind of figured it out. Don't teach us how things are done, and even movements that we could arguably say were instrumental in saving the Jewish people. I think, if not for the Hasidic movement, the Jewish people look very differently today. Say what you want about them, but that's, they preserved the Jewish spirit and unity amongst millions of Jews when other Jews who didn't have the Hasidic movement, they disappeared. Yet, when this movement was founded in the 18th century, there was so much controversy about it, and there was so many, public condemnations about them, and they were pariahified. They were ostracized. There was.
What were the primary arguments by Jews against Zionism?
So like this. So like we said, there's two oppositions. We have on one hand the religious opposition to Zionism, and then we have the assimilated, the reformed, early reformed opposition to Zionism. Herzl, by the way, when he came up with the idea of the Zionist Congress, the first Congress, so they made it in Basel, but he wanted to make it in Munich. But the Jewish or the assimilated Jewish leadership, they put up public protests because they were worried that their loyalty to the state, to Germany, that will be questioned. That's a nice little cute tidbit, but that kind of is is an insight into what the response was.
Again, it was early 1880s, right?
1897. 1897. So, the early reform, especially in America, but also in Europe, they divested themselves of any yearning to going back to Israel. That was part of the reform platform. I have a quote here. In 1885 in Pittsburgh, the famous Pittsburgh platform under the famous Rabbi Wise, who was the head of Reform Judaism. So there they came up with these 8 bullet points of what does it mean? Like, what do we believe as... This is very important to distinguish between Reform today and Reform, early Reform. But this is a direct quote. You can Google it. It's very eye-opening to see what the Reform Jews in America were like in 1885. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. So part of the fabric of the early Reform, the assimilated Jews in America and in Europe was this, basically a new definition, a redefinition of what it meant to be Jewish. So, like for example, we know that the any references to Jerusalem were taken out of the Reformed prayer books. They no longer prayed in Hebrew; they prayed in German. And here you see clearly that that's what they believe. So to them, this new movement of nationhood, of going back to Israel, and that was in direct conflict with what they believed. In fact, ironically, the Reformed Jews in America, they labeled Zionism as anti-Jewish because it ran in direct contradiction to what they considered as being the tenets of Judaism.
But if I'm a Jew 100 years ago in Pittsburgh or Baltimore,
Cincinnati,
whatever. This is what I'm trying to. What do I care? I can't be forced to go to Palestine. What do I care if some other secular Jews in Basel, Switzerland, are coming up with some declaration about?
Yeah,
Palestine?
because you want to be.
Do I feel like they represent all of Judaism, and then I have to now make a statement about how I don't agree with their?
No, well. Remember, this declaration came 12 years before that convention. But this declaration kind of demonstrates why they were opposed to it. So 100 years ago, this was a hugely controversial topic, support of Zionism. So, any Zionist fervor, any Zionist movement, any Zionist youth activities, all that were banned from any Reform temple.
Well, but in specific reference to David's question, I mean, maybe they felt, or if you were a Jew at that time, you would have felt that it was maybe showing a divided loyalty to your home country.
Exactly.
Right?
They
that was maybe something to fear.
That accusation was launched many times against American Jews.
It is is to this day.
It is to this day, absolutely.
So,
Sure, the Germans and the Japanese, 20 years after Pittsburgh, were obliged to also community leaders to make similar pledges, similar statements of disavowing what the German government.
yeah, so it was important to note that reform changes too. Like the next platform that they had was in Columbus, Ohio, in 1937. And this is the pull quote that I pulled from the internet. You can read the whole thing. Very interesting to see. Like if you contrast them, you see like I always look at the end of the 19th century as pre-assimilation because today, like even 1937. Let me read you with a quote here. This is from the reform, the official reform movement platform of the tenets of what they believe. Quote, in the rehabilitation of Palestine, the land hallowed by memories and hopes, we behold the promise of renewed life for many of our brethren. We affirm the obligation of all Jewry to aid in its upbuilding as a Jewish homeland by endeavoring to make it not only a haven of refugee for the oppressed, but also as a center of Jewish culture and spiritual life. So obviously there couldn't be a more dramatic departure from the official position of 42 years earlier.
So a different faction.
I'm sorry?
Different faction.
Sorry, more than that. 52 years earlier. Yeah.
What changed?
It was.
Hitler or the
It's
end of World War II?
or maybe I don't know. It's interesting.
Okay.
That's probably very interesting thing to discuss.
I think it became less pie in the sky in 1937 versus early 20th century. There are many more Jews in Palestine, infrastructure started to be because it became more feasible.
I think assimilation, just the dream of assimilation died. It used to be that we mentioned this once before, like in a Reformed temple in America, you couldn't walk in with a yarmulke. Like, you wouldn't be welcome there. That was the attitude. It was very different. Like we don't have that anymore today. It doesn't exist anymore. And that's just the reality. Like, so you see a change like 50 years later, and it's a very different tune.
So did it become more realistic, and it took off?
Well, it did. Of course it did.
As part of the British Mandate and the Balfour Declaration.
Balfour Declaration in 1917, the Peel Commission in 1937, the UN Partition Plan in 1947. Yes, it became more clear, but even at the the throes of the movement, it took a while for the stance to change. Even in Houston, in Houston we have two massive Reform temples. There was a secession based upon this issue. In 1944, Emmanuel was founded as a breakaway from Beth Israel. Why? Over support of Zionism. Like even after this declaration, like it took a while for it to actually filter through. That's why it was founded. That's why there's two massive Reform temples, because of the argument as over the support of Zionism.
You would think in 44 that they will be in favor of Zionism.
Yeah, but
it wasn't as revealed.
And also, but it was an undoing. The early Reform was very, very serious about assimilation. So, and there was a long history in that. So, to them, it was a radical departure by saying we support Israel. Like that ran against 100 years of Reform. So yeah.
Can you give me in one sentence, what is Zionism?
Yes, Zionism in one sentence. Zionism is the movement to establish a home for the Jewish people in a country and sovereignty in Israel. That's what it is.
Who coined the word?
Zionism was coined by a guy in 1893. I saw his name yesterday in my research. I don't remember what it was. Remember the term Zionism, the term Zion is already in the scripture. It's part of the prayers. We talk about, Zion. That's what the name that was called for Israel.
So it was not from the movie Matrix, right?
Oh no.
Just kidding.
Okay, so that's an example of kind of like I would call like secular anti-Zionism, or assimilationist anti-Zionism, and that was one faction that rejected Zionism, and the other faction was the religious anti-Zionism. And I would say like the religious camp was basically split. Originally at the first convention, there were a lot of very respected rabbinic dignitaries from all across Europe that participated. But I think eventually they were probably worried that the movement was very secular, was somewhat even anti-religious, and thus many religious leaders, I guess they came out as anti-Zionism. But I would say that many of the masses, we call the masses of the people, the street, in the religious community was probably still overwhelmingly Zionist, but there was still very, very strong opposition from the religious Jews across the world. Now, why would they oppose it? Hey, it's a fulfillment of the prophecies. Like you would think, we talk about going to Israel, and this is it. This is a movement. Why were they hesitant to jump forward? So, number one, we already mentioned,
The Messiah.
could only be done with the Messiah.
We'll get to that in a second. That's I think the third element of it. The first element we mentioned already is, hey, the movement was led by people that were anti-religious or very secular. That was one thing that they were worried about. Additionally, there was this fear that Zionism would eventually replace Torah and observance of the mitzvahs as being what defines someone as being Jewish. If we could kind of fulfill like our spiritual need by supporting the land to the detriment of everything else that it means to be Jewish. The rabbis say, hey, listen, to be Jewish means to, first and foremost, to be observant to the Torah. The Torah kind of outlines the mission statement of a Jew. Now, Zionism is coming. They fear that Zionism is going to come around, and that will replace the traditional perspective of what's important as a Jew. And I think that that concern was not unfounded. We look at many of the founders of, almost all of the founders of the actual state. Were in their youth observant and kind of dropped observance of the law in favor of exclusivity in their Zionistic goals and activities. That's number one. I looked at today. Last night I was looking at the famous Pew Research poll. Do you guys hear about that? That they did, maybe 2 years ago. That was basically the biggest research that was done into American Jewry in a long time. So I looked at the number of Jews. What do Jews, especially young Jews, what do they say is essential to being Jewish? So I found that double the number that said, quote, observance of Jewish law, said caring for Israel. Said caring for Israel. So I think we could argue that yes, this the Zionism did, to a certain extent, probably for some people, replace the traditional perspective of what's essential to be Jewish. Who knows? In the early parts of the state, there was forced secularization of immigrants. This is one of the sad episodes in Israel's early history, where they would bring in many immigrants, especially from the eastern part, Arabian world, and they would put them in these internment camps, and they, like the Yemenite Jews and the Jews from Iran and Iraq and North Africa. Those Jews, they came and they were very traditional, and they said, "Hey, listen, this is Israel. You don't need that. Everyone's Jewish. You don't need that anymore. You can leave that behind." That was a kind of one of the black eyes of the early statehood, which kind of demonstrates that was a thing. Where Zionism and living in Israel and being in a Jewish state, well, you don't need anything else. And lastly, this culture.
Practice at all? Is that what they were teaching?
The details are somewhat probably different in each individual case, but what's absolutely clear was that many, probably thousands of immigrants were told in these camps Now you're in Israel. You don't need Shabbos. You don't need this. You don't need that. The Yemenites, they had very traditional, very Jewish-looking clothing, and they had very traditional, like they had these very big payas that they used to have, like these curly, like long, straight, thin payas. Like there's episodes of them being cut off. Like, hey, you don't need that anymore. Here, we're in Israel. Everyone's Jewish. You can, just let it go.
The centrality of Judaism.
Centrality of Jew, and this the Jewish culture of the new Jew was somewhat, you would be wary if you already have a traditional perspective of what it means to be Jewish.
So the concern that the religious anti-Zionists had was kind of, they had reason.
Oh yeah. It means, and ironically, both the secular and the religious opposition to Zionism had a lot to worry about. If you want to maintain your perspective of what it means to be Jewish, Zionism was going to change that, one way or the other. Either it's going to make give Judaism the nationalistic element that the Reform movement was against, or it was going to give the Jewish people the nationalistic element that the religious Jews were fearful of, because that would replace other elements of what it means to be Jewish.
Politics makes strange men.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, what happened once the state was founded? So this is very important. Despite the fact that there was opposition to Zionism from these very polar opposite camps in the Jewish world, it seems clear that once the state was founded, everyone was on board. Oh, almost everyone was on board. Once the state was founded, I think it was very pragmatic to realize that this is a thing and this is not going away. And the trend and the mobility that the state had at the beginning, I think it was supported across the board, from the religious side and from the secular side. Everyone got on board. I think you ask people today, Jews almost universally support and adore the state of Israel. I think there's a problem, on a side note here, with some young Jews today. Young Jews that feel compelled, to be open-minded, and feel compelled to always call into question, what Israel does, and that's because they don't want to sound like they're one-sided. They don't want to sound like they're not being fair. But my perspective on this matter is, hey, listen, in the words of Michael Corleone, you don't go against family. You don't go against whatever. You don't. So to me, yes, is Israel perfect? No. Is their treatment of their neighbors perfect? No. Is it treatment? But it's still family. We're going to support family against our family's enemies. Irrespective. And the truth is, if you just do the sum total of everything, we treat the Arabs better than the Arabs themselves treat themselves.
Well, to me, that's what it's not. I think the family argument has some merit too. From a,
I think it's two arguments.
Nostalgic, but there's merit, I think, in comparative treatment there.
And I think there's legitimacy to question if everything that Israel does is just, but not to support the enemy. That's my point. Right. You have to support Israel, even though you know that your family members are a little bit cuckoo. There's something wrong with them. Still, you support them when they're faced with enemies that threaten her existence, etc.
Just relating, just to get back to the founding.
Yeah.
To get into the current politics. Was Israel founded as a socialist, collectivist state? And if so, why?
Well, I think that was all the rage. I think we look at what exists today. The idealism that was behind the communist movement is something which is bizarre to us. Like, now we have 100 years of experience. We realize it doesn't work, and that's it. We moved on. But that was huge. The Jews were all over this the utopian socialist dream. In the Soviet Union, we know
social democratic.
Yeah, it was a democracy from day one, but who won all the votes?
But officially, that's an interesting question. Is there anything? I don't claim to know anything about the Israel Constitution or anything, but was it?
Doesn't have a constitution. That's right.
Okay.
It has what's called, they have basic laws, which.
Supreme Court.
Well, okay, so whatever the law, but the laws, is it codified somewhere that there's supposed to be a socialist state?
No, but if you look at the way of life and the laws that existed in the early times of the state, they had state mandated laws that us in America would label as socialism. Curtailing of kind of the freedom of so. I think it was also a practical matter. We look. It was an half idealistic, half practical, because they had very limited resources, and they were, basically at constant war for the first 20, 30 years and they still are today, really. But
here's an interesting question. Go back to those lack of constitution and founding. Was there some codification of separation of states?
so we'll talk about the because say what you want about Ben Gurion. He was a very pragmatic leader. He was very shrewd, and he was willing to compromise with all the camps basically involved. Despite, for example, at the first election, Ben Gurion's socialist or left-leaning party, called the Mapam, they won an overwhelming majority. So they didn't need to have a coalition government. They didn't have a unity government. But he realized that, he wanted to coalesce as much support as he could. This is a fledgling state. The existence and the continuity of the state was always in doubt for the first 20, 30 years. It was a miracle that they won the first war. Just the fact that they lasted throughout the first war with the ragtag army against 5 mighty imposing enemies, that itself is a miracle. But he realized that you want to have as broad a support base as possible. So he always included the religious parties and all the various different elements into the national dialogue, and he included them in the unity governments. And he worked really hard to make sure that there was not going to be internal strife and civil war, because that was a real possibility at the formation of the state. Sorry? Well, Irgun maybe not, because he couldn't stand Irgun. He
was ready to wipe them out.
Oh yeah, So, well, eventually that changed. Begin was allowed to the part. It was another example in June 1967. On the doorsteps of the Six-Day War, the Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, who was a disciple basically of Ben Gurion, he made a unity government. He brought in all the parties, because when your very existence is threatened, I think you get very pragmatic. You want to make sure that everyone's on board, everyone's united. And I think that was very important to Ben Gurion, and it's to his credit that there wasn't any massive dissent and there wasn't any civil war.
Sometimes I wish the United States government had a flavor of that, because I think we become so polarized here that we cease to work together.
Yeah, but I do think in times of crisis we do kind of rally together.
Yeah.
Yes.
For more or less.
I like the idea of unity governments. I mean, I understand there's problems there, but I like the working together, because if Israel had not worked together and had this unity government, I don't think they would have survived.
Probably not. I would tend to agree with that. Okay, so but back to the point that someone brought. I remember who brought up the point. There are still till this day certain segments of, I would say, the religious anti-Zionism that are very, very, very strong. First and foremost, someone mentioned the Lubavitch Schneerson, the Satmars. This is their thing, anti-Zionism. There's pockets of them in Israel, but there's a huge contingency of it in the United States. They don't recognize the state. They don't vote. Every time there's a voting cycle, there's massive signs posted all over the country. It's prohibited to vote. It's against the Torah law. You can't vote. You can't participate. You can't take any government funding. Nothing.
The movement that Orthodox movement that supports Ahmadinejad.
So there's in that group, which in itself is kind of a fringe group, even though it's very large, and underestimate how big it is. There's a radical group that's what they call the new Turkarta. It's like 100 people. but they negotiate with Arafat, and they were on Arafat's parliament. He had like a few like these Hasidic Jews. I call them Jews. I don't know how you could fraternize with someone who slaughtered Jews by the thousands. How did you go? There's this picture on the internet of these guys that look like they're really pious Jews with big beards and big payas and big hats, and they're going to Ahmadinejad and they're kissing him and they're hugging him, and that you said that's a radical element, and even in the extreme anti-Zionist camp, they're ostracized because I think that they're taking like this their religious reasons for opposition to the state, they're taking it too far. Of course. Why would you ever want to befriend people that want to slaughter millions of Jews? It doesn't make any sense. But that's a very small group, but of course they get a lot of attention. But the rationale for this group, opposition of the state, and even to this day, like I remember when I was in Israel, I was in Yeshiva. So our Yeshiva was literally on the plaza of the Kotel. On the plaza, like you walk out on the the terrace and you see the Western Wall right there. Like our Yeshiva buildings took up 45% of the plaza, basically. So we used to always have like these people from the Satmars. They would always come, and they would come to our balcony and pray because they wouldn't go to the Kotel. Never go to the Kotel, because the Kotel, it has an Israeli flag. Because it has an Israeli flag, we don't go there, and they never ever go there. So if they want to go see, they go visit the temple ruins, so to speak, they would come and they would come sit down and pray or whatever. So that still exists. They quote this the Talmud in Tractate Subos. It says there's a very short little snippet of Talmud that is hugely debated. Because the Talmud says that there's 3 oaths. It quotes a verse in the Song of Songs. 3 oaths that are placed upon the Jews. Placed upon the world. 2 of them on the Jews and 1 on the Gentiles. Number 1, that they shouldn't go to Israel as a wall. What I mean, they shouldn't go forcefully. They shouldn't try to capture Israel forcefully. Number 1. Number 2, they shouldn't rebel against their host nations. Number 3, that on the Gentiles, they shouldn't oppress the Jews that much. They shouldn't oppress. Well, the second one. Well, number 1, they shouldn't forcefully try to acquire the land of Israel. Number 2, they shouldn't rebel against their host nations. Number 3, that on the host nations, the Gentiles shouldn't mistreat the Jews that much. That's what it says.
Just the right amount.
Just the right amount, exactly. So the Satmar perspective on this is that they take it as a prohibition to establish a state in mass. So like bringing lots of people coming, that's the source. Books and scholarship is written debating this topic. What does it really mean? Does it mean not to establish a state? Does it mean not to try to usher in the Messianic era? Too strongly, too forcefully. This is a huge doodle list. It's very interesting. The Satmar Rebbe, he wrote a whole book, like a thick book, only about his perspective on these 4 lines of Talmud. So that's that. Even to this day, they're very much anti-Zionism. You see, if you go to certain parts of Jerusalem, you see Zionists are not Jews. Jews are not Zionists. They take this matter very seriously. But they're the exception, I would say. The overwhelming majority of religious Jews, and like we said, also the assimilationism or the reform, that changed, and they are fully embracing of Israel. I would call the religious embracing, well, not the religious Zionism, of the religious embracing of the state is more like I would say a hopeful or pragmatic embracing. Is this a fulfillment of the prophecies, or is it not? It perhaps could be. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. It's kind of hopeful and pragmatic that let's embrace the state, let's participate, let's vote, let's be part of the national dialogue. But always be wary that there's a lot of headwinds that we face in actually making this work. And as to whether or not the state is going to be part of the prophecies, the messianic plan and process. That's uncertain. That's up for debate, and who knows? In our shul in Southwest Houston, so we say a prayer for the state. Every Shabbat they say 3 prayers right after the Torah. They one prayer for the United States. It's a prayer that for the elected officials, the president, the vice president, whatever. Then there's another prayer that they say for the state of Israel. So like the officials and the governments and whatever. And there's a third prayer that was said for the soldiers of Israel. You protect them, give them strength, give them whatever. Within, I would say, like the religious community, you have the religious Zionists, and those are the people that would, let's say Hallel and make Yom HaSmut into a holiday. It's like a Jewish holiday. This is a day that, it's a Jewish holiday. There are those that those are the original, what we call religious Zionists. Then you'll have what I like to call the pragmatic or the hopeful Zionists, the people that, yes, we embrace the state, but we're hoping that we're not certain that this is a fulfillment of any of the prophecies, but we're hopeful that maybe it will be. So that particular prayer, that's a prayer for the state of Israel. So it starts off with bless the state of Israel, Reishit Smichat Geulatenu, the beginning of the development of our redemption. Those are the most controversial words because I think the author was one of the chief rabbis of Israel. That's I think who wrote it. So he as a religious Zionist took the stand that it's this is the fermenting of this the redemption, the ultimate redemption that we've been talking about and we've been praying for. That's this. And the other ones want to temper it a little bit. They say it should be the beginning of the fermenting of our redemption. We hope it will be. That's kind of like the difference. It's kind of like a semantic difference. What exactly is the religious perspective on the state?
There are large
sorry, Jonathan.
in Boston right now that's anti-Zionist.
Large what?
Enclave, suburb or something like that up there. A whole group that's anti-Zionist, Jewish people.
Well, where?
Boston.
Boston?
Yeah, in Boston. There's Jews in Boston. Yeah,
Well,
of course.
A Jewish girl from Boston told me there was also another section up there that believes they should have as many babies as possible to replace the Holocaust lost. The lost people in the Holocaust.
I'm not familiar about that sect.
So 60 years in, is the debate over?
Absolutely not.
I understand there's some people there that don't believe in Zionism, but 60 years in of the founding.
I think what's clearly settled. My grandfather wrote a wonderful article. I couldn't find it. I was looking for it over the whole Shabbat. I couldn't find this article. I've seen it. I know exactly where the page it starts. But he wrote so much. I don't know which book it's in. But he wrote this great article about his perspective on the state. And he said, listen, he gives examples. He says that many times in history, he quotes the Talmud. The Talmud says that someone cannot be successful in their study unless they fail first. He quotes the Talmud. So a teacher cannot teach properly, won't teach the proper law unless you stumble a little bit on the onset. So he takes that and develops the idea that in history, great ideas, they don't necessarily have the smoothest beginning. So he says, listen, you look at the state now. I don't know exactly what year he wrote it. You look at the state now, and you ask yourself, okay, is this really the fulfillment of the prophecies? It doesn't look like it. The Jewish law is not in place. It's trying to be. I don't know when he wrote it, but it's because it's changing. But he says it's trying to be a very secular state. It's a secular state with secular laws, and you go to Tel Aviv on Shabbat, and it looks like any other day. Is what the biggest city in Israel? Where's Shabbat? This is a Jewish. This is it. Is this really what it is? But he kind of says, listen, he's basically intimating that it is it, but it's not starting off smoothly. It takes a while to iron out the, and I do believe that it's becoming more progressively Jewish. Like, for example, there's a law right now being debated in the Knesset, which was very controversial because
Makes Arabs wear blue.
well, there's that part of the law. I don't know if it's the same law or not, but it's a law declaring Israel as a Jewish state. It's eliminating Arabic as an official language. It's only Hebrew. It's a Jewish state. We can have just Hebrew. It talks about as inspiration for Israeli law, the Torah. So there are even legislative efforts to kind of slowly move the dial at making Israel more Jewish in the traditional perspective.
Okay, but for those Jews that are anti-Zionist today in 2015,
Well, which Jews?
some of the ones that
The Samars? Yeah. Okay. What about
so
them?
for them, as a tiny
To them, like, this is their rallying cry.
Okay.
This is what they believe. They say that the Yeshivas shouldn't take any money from the government. So, the government in the 70s started the practice of treating the Yeshivas as institutes of higher scholarship. Therefore, they're eligible to receive support from the government, financial, like any college or university. So throughout, for the past 40 years, basically, more or less, there's been support of the yeshivas from the government. So this group, they say, our schools don't take a shekel from the government. We don't want nothing. And I saw, when I was Googling yesterday, I saw this other yeshiva, they decided, or they had a big meeting, a big celebration, they decided we're not taking any money from the government, It's still an issue. Is it significant? Yes. Is it a majority? Absolutely not. And I think the trend is moving very clearly in the direction of Israel becoming much closer to. You look at Netanyahu when he speaks. Yeah, you go to his YouTube channel. I might have mentioned this last time or in recent time. You look at Netanyahu's YouTube channel. So whenever he speaks, there's always like Talmud behind him and Jewish books behind him. Shimon Peres, when he speaks to the United Nations, he put on this massive yarmulke. You see, like, a picture of him, like, it looks like he got like 4 sizes too big. That would have never happened 50, 60 years ago. Would have never happened. It didn't happen like that. 39 out of the 120 Knesset members are personally observant. It's a huge number. We'll talk a little bit about the yeshiva world and the yeshiva army, that debate. When the original status quo law, as it's called, status quo, that Ben Gurion agreed with, like I said, as in his political savvy, agreed to allow the yeshiva students temporary exemptions from army service, there were 400 students. In the entire state of Israel, there were 400 students that were in the category called Torato Umnato, which means that they study Torah full time. 400 students. In 2005, that number was 41,000 students. So, you could argue, the entire population increased by a factor of 10 as well. But the percentage of those that are engaged in Torah study full time increased by a factor of 100.
Is it because of the natural growth, or new people come to do it?
It's both. It's both. A higher birth rate, influx of immigrants. So yes, there's a lot. Well, yes, you have fraud in every. There is fraud everywhere, But I'll tell you an example. Like my grandfather had a yeshiva. My father was he was 18. He wasn't into yeshiva. So he said to my grandfather, he said, "Listen, can I sign up to your yeshiva and avoid army service?" My grandfather told me, "Absolutely not." So my father went to yeshiva. Went to the army at 18. Because if you're not in yeshiva, you shouldn't have the exemption of being a Torah student. A Torah student went to the army, went for 4 years in the army. When he had, my brother was born in my second oldest brother was born in New York. He was born over Passover. But my mother was a few days late with her with her whatever, having the baby. So my father had to fly back. So he was there for Passover, but he missed the birth and the bris of his own son because he was in the army, and he was only allowed to take 3 weeks off or whatever. He missed it. What are you going to do? He missed it. He went to the army, and he had 2 kids, but he was in the army, and I think for sure we should agree that if there's going to be an exemption for yeshiva students, it has to be done in a way that there's no fraud. If someone's in yeshiva, they are exempt, and if someone's not yeshiva or not yeshiva full time, they should go to the army. We'll get that in a second, but I think that you look at those numbers depending on which kind of system of demographics or that you want to examine, in any way you're going to examine, we could clearly deduce that Israel is becoming more and more much closer. It's still far away, I would say, much closer to what the traditional dream of reestablishing a Jewish and the stretches of the Jewish state in Israel.
How significant is the quote-unquote peace movement in Israel, and what exactly does that mean? I mean, there used to be marches and things.
It's the far left. We call the far left. It's very small. Very small. Like, there's an election upcoming in March.
And all of those.
Second, third Intifada. But it's. I think that the politics in Israel just had a massive shift. It took about 30 years before there was a government in Israel that had a right wing government. Till Begin in 1977, and he shocked the world. Everyone thought he was going to lose. He shocked the world. But since then, you have basically the Likud as being the dominant, since the 80s. With obviously you have you have some exceptions. You have Barak in the 90s. You have Perez and Rabin. And then they had in the 80s, they had the unity governments. They did both. They did 2 years you, 2 years you. That was kind of nice.
What about Omar?
Sharon.
Well, Sharon, he split from Likud to found Kadima. And Olmert was also Likud.
Has she ever been pregnant?
No, she's never been prime minister. She's been foreign minister. She hasn't been prime minister. And she won't be this time either. It's pretty clear that there is more than the majority needed on the quote unquote right wing. I'm sorry, I know you were before everyone. I noticed that. I didn't forget about you, Janet. I promise. But yes, so the trend has moved. I think Meretz is the party that's always identified with the far left. I think they're projected to get 4 seats, which is about 3% of the parliament. So it's very small.
You kind of danced around my question, but Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, wants to have as part of his negotiating platform that Israel is a Jewish state. He wants that to be clarified. Yeah. Do you think that is a good plan?
Absolutely. He has a few good ideas. I think, for example, any peace agreement should be agreed upon by national referendum. It's a very good idea. You make a drastic step. It has to be agreed upon. And listen, if the Palestinians don't want to accept Israel as a Jewish state, why are we negotiating with them? Who is the position? Who has the leverage? The Israelis realize that they have the leverage. They have a booming economy, or at least comparatively. They have a modern economy. And they have a state, and they have autonomy, So the longer they drag their feet, I think the better off they are. I don't think the Palestinians will ever get as good of an offer as they got in 2000.
Is there?
From Barak,
I don't understand. I've heard about this thing Janet's talking about this proposal to make Israel a Jewish state. Is there any doubt that it's a Jewish state?
Well, officially, put it in the law. That's the point.
It has to do with where it's going in the future, which is ultimately the right.
Okay.
That has to be addressed.
But I don't think declaring it a Jewish state is going to make Abbas any more receptive to the right of return or his view. I don't think that's going to.
But he doesn't have what exactly is he offering in? Just imagine this was any negotiation. He has zero leverage really. His only leverage is public opinion, world public opinion. That's the only thing he's got.
Abbas?
Abbas, yes, the Palestinians. That's all they have.
Yeah, but making it what is he going to just say? Well, if they make it a Jewish state, quote unquote, he's going to just say to his flock, well, now they're a Jewish state, we got no choice, let's just...
Well, or
I
when
don't think
you
that's
have
right.
seen in the past 50 years courageous Muslim leaders like Sadat.
Yeah, but that was done...
And he got
Sadat was
shot for it,
before
but-
Sadat was done before anybody declared a Jewish state. So
Oh, no, I'm thinking it was implicit in the Declaration of Israel that it's the Jewish state.
Well, that's my whole point. So
yes.
to me, this is superfluous. I don't even know
That's
the
right, but,
purpose of it.
you know,
I don't think it's superfluous at all.
Nice.
Okay.
Argue it out.
All right. Well, I don't think it's bad. I don't think it matters that much.
I think it does matter because he wants it declared a Jewish state on the world stage once and for all.
And explicitly have it out
And
there.
explicitly have it out there. I agree with you.
And I also think that probably, this is possibly he realizes that Israel is probably going to be better off without an agreement. Possibly.
Without an agreement with the Palestinians.
Without an agreement?
Yes. Possibly.
Well, it depends on how bad you do.
Possibly.
Why do you think that?
Because, think about it on the terms of what do they stand to gain? What does Israel stand to gain? And what do they stand to lose?
If they
Just think about
have to
it.
give up things that are needed for their
If they give up, he can't give up Jerusalem.
Right.
You know, so if they ever actually get to a real negotiating table,
Divided city.
the Palestinians and the Jews will never agree on this issue. It will never happen. You cannot negotiate that.
What about what was offered supposedly that Arafat turned down in the
They'll
Accords during the Clinton administration?
Camp David Accords.
Well, yeah,
Camp David too, right?
Yes.
Not the original, but yeah.
but he offered half of Jerusalem.
He
Okay,
offered
so-
it, and
He
that's
offered it.
and 97% of the West Bank with
Right.
equal land
And
swaps.
Arafat rejected it.
A connection between Gaza and the West Bank, the best offer he'll ever get, and they
Right.
rejected it because ultimately the charter of the Palestinians declares clearly, plain-facedly, that the only thing that they're going to accept is all of Palestine
Right, I understand.
and all of Israel, and they'll never be able to coexist with it.
When they talk about occupied territory,
They mean
they're
everything.
talking about Israel.
Everything.
They're
exactly.
thinking everything is
So,
occupied
do
territory.
I think? I don't think that any agreement will ever happen, but I think it helps the negotiation of the Israelis by declaring, as they justly should declare, that this is a Jewish state, and if that is something that they cannot accept, the Palestinians, okay, no deal. You
One of
know,
the rules of war is you never give up conquered land.
you know.
And now they're paying for
Yeah,
it.
now they're paying for it.
All this giving land for peace and so forth will never work.
Well, and it's just so irritating.
Oh, that's a
because
nice
everybody
argument.
was told in Exodus to just drive everybody out, kill them all, and be done with it, and they didn't, and we still pay.
Yeah.
But whatever. Like I'm
ready to sign
I'm
up
like,
for break them
I'm whatever.
Who
Like
doesn't
I'm
come
very,
running,
but it's one of those things. It's my thoughts and opinion. I have a tendency to be kind of all over the board. I think this discussion has made me realize exactly how much of a religious Zionist I am, and it irritates me. It doesn't irritate me to be a religious Zionist. The Palestinians irritate me. I would like them all gone. Like I would like them all gone. I would crank it all the way back. I would find a way. I would make it line up with Torah. Like the idea that Israel doesn't have a constitution. WTF? It's called the Torah.
I'm saying.
But this is me.
So you
This is
probably.
me, and I'm clearly,
I'm
like,
saying, but
heated
that is
about it.
a very, very popular sentiment in Israel.
Yeah.
That's basically the platform of Beit Yehudi,
Yeah.
which is going to be the second or third largest contingency. That's Naftali Bennett.
Yeah.
And that's what he says. Listen, this is our land. It's been our land, and
honestly, this is a very from a contemporary mindset. This is very bloody and barbaric, but this is what it is. Like we should have been done with this long ago. Like if we didn't mess around since the beginning of time, we wouldn't still have these problems. We can't kill everybody, I know, but
I do believe that someone like Ben Gurion.
I'm sorry.
I think someone like Ben Gurion would have probably made decisions, more decisive decisions. But like in the '67 war, that was their opportunity. Yeah. The best opportunity was in '67. '67, everyone, all the Arabs fled across the Jordan. The week after, they had set up, what they did is they set up basically army posts all across the Jordan River, and they said, anyone comes over, we shoot them. And then Moshe Dayan said that's not humanitarian.
Moshe Dayan was a great military leader, but a lousy Jew.
Yeah. Well, he said, the first thing that they did after they captured the old city, hours after they captured the old city, Moshe Dayan gave control of Temple Mount to the Muslim Waqf.
Why would you?
I don't know why. That's what he did.
I don't know why. Yeah, they were ready to tear down the Dome of the Rock and everything else. I remember that.
I guess. I don't know. I don't have enough. It's one of those things. Like, I am much more in the level of kind of religious and emotional opinion. I don't know enough about the history to have a rational, scholarly opinion. I don't know enough about the people in the history, but I know where my gut is, and that's when you get these fiery responses from me, because that's where my gut is, but whatever, yeah.
Well, your gut is exactly in the same place where German guts was in the 1950s, right? We just can't use it all, but we should try.
No, I don't want people dead. Like, I really don't want people dead. I know it sounds that way.
The Kishkish ring.
You just get tired of having the same old, nobody wants death.
We wanted to pay them for
but what are they going to do? Like, they're not leaving, and I don't know. There is no answer.
And this is a hugely contentious issue that's been around for a long time.
So the experience most recently, right? Lebanon, especially, right? I mean, this is not the same Israeli Defense Forces from '67 and '70.
Oh no, they're the juggernaut. They're the juggernaut.
No, I
yeah.
disagree. I don't think there is a lot of issues with the last incursion into Lebanon a couple of years ago.
2006.
2006.
Israel has the strongest military in the Middle East by far. It's not even close.
Yeah, and everybody knows that.
And number two is Egypt. And Egypt, by the way, I think we talk about courageous Muslim leaders. Egypt has prospered more than any other country, probably with the exception of Saudi Arabia, because they don't have as much oil. But since their decision to embrace Israel, they get $3 billion in economic and military support, aid, and they have recognition, and and they have the whole nonsense that they had a couple of years ago. I think was very, very short-sighted, as we see. They didn't really bear that much fruition.
Let me be more specific. I'm not talking about a land war. I'm talking about the proliferation of nuclear weapons by Iran. Is Israeli?
So that is a potential. That's a potential existential threat to Israel. I think there's no doubt about it. Netanyahu talks about it all the time. He's going to speak in Congress now in 2 weeks. He's going to mention that probably half of his speech.
And that's the point of his coming.
But
Isn't it 2 weeks?
Moved it to March.
Well, but the Speaker of the House invited him, breaching protocol, which I have personally no problem with, because I'd rather breach protocol than breach the law, which Obama does all the time.
So in 1981, there was a nuclear facility in Osirak in Baghdad. In Iraq, exactly.
And the Israeli Air Force
took it out. And in 2007, there was in Syria, they took it out. Exactly. As to what existed in Iran, I'm not an expert in nuclear weapons or whatever. I don't know anything about them. But what I do know is that we've been hearing for a long time that Iran is a month away or 5 months away. We hear that for the past 15 years.
Something about breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. It's just as to what exactly happened, I don't know what they're doing. There was this Stuxnet. Remember that?
the computer virus.
And then the computer virus, and then they did the assassinations of all their nuclear scientists in Iran. Was that Mossad? Was that Israel? Who knows?
And
probably.
They've been bombing also Syria, and that's been kept pretty quiet. That's happened a couple of times.
I also think.
In general.
I think that the price of oil and how that affects Iran,
Good for
probably. I'm sorry.
more power to Israel doing these things. I mean,
So,
they need to.
yeah, well, they have to. They have no other option. But I think that probably is going to positively contribute, because if a country doesn't have enough money to pay its municipality workers and the people that are sweeping the streets and the people that are working for the government, they probably have less time and focus and money and energy to pay for the proxy battle in Syria and in Lebanon and in Gaza, and to pay for all that it takes to create this weapon that's probably not going to do anything for you. So there's probably another good thing. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. It remains to be seen. Most likely, I think we always underestimate the power of international pressure and sanctions. I think we really do. I think for us, it's like, we could say, hey, just bomb them all. But like, from my understanding, they diversified their locations of nuclear sites. Many of them are built, underneath mountains and stuff. I don't know how practical it is. I'm sure that if there was possible for them to, take a reasonable military operation against them, they would probably do it. Just get it over with and deal with the consequences.
I think Netanyahu is waiting because of the extension of the talks.
It's actually the talks, but I also think that within Iran itself, I think the fervor of the Islamists probably waned a little bit as well.
Yeah, but I think that might be all the more reason that they're really stepping up their efforts to get the bomb. I just think they need to. I think the religious people who really hold the power in Iran.
They're Shiites. They're out of their minds. That's the problem. They're Shiites. They're Shiite Muslims. They're crazy.
Yeah,
they're crazy.
Well, that's my point. And they are driven ideologically, religiously to do this.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing.
And when someone's willing to die and just take out millions of people with them.
These clowns are very willing to die.
Yeah, it's insane.
And that's the difference between the Soviets were rational people. But
Exactly.
When we're talking about North Korea or the Shiites or others, we're talking about jihad and others that they're philosophically crazy, and they would be willing to incinerate all of their population if they could incinerate Israel.
So that's very scary.
Yeah.
That's very.
Looking at the long term.
I think Netanyahu will strike.
You think so? But the question is if they have
he's
the
waiting.
capability.
I think he would have done it by now, but they extended the talks.
Yeah.
And he's waiting to see it to break down there and what happens. And I think when that comes to a conclusion, Netanyahu will strike. I don't think they have any choice.
I think the good thing from our perspective as Americans, though, is we can take some pride and comfort in the fact it seems like here in this country, our country, Israel, is very widely supported by the person on the street compared to Europe and all that.
Relatively, yes.
Because in Congress it is very strong. I mean, it wasn't the president.
It's like the only good thing to come from the evangelical religious right, in my personal opinion. That's the only thing that.
I think the moral fiber they're promoting, not just for Israel. I think the religious right is doing very good.
But what they say to your face and what they say in their own home.
I don't care what somebody thinks. I care what somebody does. And right now there are friends, and we don't have enough friends, and we should be very appreciative of any type of support. I think.
Except that Israel has to speak for themselves.
Iran supported by Russia. Everybody know, right? Now China with Russia, they came, allies for a long time. Okay, but between the United States and Israel, we talk a lot, but we have to talk less and act more. She say we don't believe in to kill people. Sometimes you have to. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
That's my point. I decided to die when I was 10 years old. I said, well, I have two choices. Live Salvador or die. Because when I stayed in Salvador in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
If I don't live, I gotta die. Why? Because they gotta take me to the recruiter to fight the guerrillas, right? So I don't have no choice. My whole village, from my home family, we don't have no choice. So I say, to get a visa
Salvador.
to the United States, I have to prove I have millions of dollars. The other way, they don't want you here. So I don't have no choice to cross the Rio Bravo swimming. So it's easy to talk, but the thing is we have to act. And around this sometime a little 7 years old, 8 years old, we don't have to talk a lot. And that's the problem we have in the United States, talking, but we're not doing nothing. You know, we've been here for 2,000 years talking, and you know, it's kind of another thing. It's easy, I've told him, to make a Jew convert a Jew to Gentile and to convert a Gentile to a Jew. It's easy.
Yeah.
So we have to act. You know, I've been listening to you guys for a long time, but we have to act, not talk. Act. You know, it's like this. Look, Saddam Hussein had two choices. You do Saddam Hussein way or kill him. United States come over there and make peace. These people don't listen but talk. You have to cut the head off. You know, and that's
The only thing they fear.
That's, you have to. You don't have a choice. Look,
Well,
God,
because
God
it's
has
because
already
at
said.
at its root, you're
When
trying
God,
to
the Torah
negotiate with
says,
irrational
we don't
people
have to look nothing else.
at the absolute
The
Torah.
Tanakh, the Torah is very clear. Anything,
Yeah.
any answer you want, any answer I want, is in the Torah. I don't even have to come and ask your opinions because it's in the Torah, but you have to know how to look. You know, and the thing is, when we talk witty,
It's awesome. No more talking for me.
and I tell you, nobody knows this. I only went 3 years to school.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Only second grade. And for me to go to school, that's why I appreciate so much life. I had to walk 3 hours that way and 3 hours coming back. And I had to cross 3 rivers, like 7 creeks, swimming with the snakes. Huh? No, alligator we don't have a snake. Okay? But the thing is, I come here and I see we have everything and people still complaining. You know, it's still, you know, when you know we have everything, when you lose it. And in Israel, I love Israel, my family. All right, I've been quiet for so many years. And the thing is, we have to come together. You know, it's like we talk about Jewish community. Yeah, but Jewish community, everybody has their own kitchen, everybody has this, everybody. You know, it sounds like a Jewish community. I want more united, more. You problem, my problem, but we divided.
All
Look
of
at
Israel
Israel.
is
We have a
responsible one for
Semi-Jews,
another. Like
we
that's-
have this, we have that. There are so many. But we have to act. We have to say, listen, your problem, my problem. This is that. And this is what Jews make. But we came, it's well, that's why my family don't want to marry Gentile. And I tell you, I told my mother, when they marry somebody I don't know,
Yeah.
and when I met my wife, I said, hey, you, come over. You my rep. And I don't want to marry Gentiles because different culture. You know, I want to marry because everybody, my mother, my father, everybody married Gentiles, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Jews, you know. But it's because now I understand why. Because it's different belief, different culture, all right? And I tell you a short. When my family moved to Latin America, it was like 8 brothers. Some went back to Israel. When they used to work hard, go back and forth. One day, that was my grandfather's. Sorry to cut you, but I only got a few more minutes and I'll finish.
Go ahead. I'm enjoying this.
One day, this man went to work. The lunch never showed up. There was 4 brothers, Jews. Why? Went to work. Why? The lunch never showed up. They went back to the house and what happened to our women? They find the women's dead. You know what they did? Get ready with the machetes, the weapons, and went to the next village, kill everybody. Hey, I believe, my opinion. You mess with somebody who mess with me, I throw the whole house for the window, like they say. You know, I have to do what I have to do.
Yeah.
But I believe not to her. Like my grandfather used to show me, Thor said, who love you is going to help you, who's going to bother you. You know, I believe, if I don't give you, I'm going to take. You know, so and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, so, you know what I'm saying? We have to come together. That's the goal. No answer too many questions.
Yeah.
My opinion is, like this, like the chicken, you know, the ham.
Yeah.
I remember, you know,
Yeah.
what they do.
To
That's the
shelter
chicken.
under the
Yeah.
wing of it. Which
And
you
then
see
the-
that metaphor so much.
So
Like that
that-
is the metaphor for Israel. Is that theoretically we should be chicks gathered under God's wing. Essentially,
Okay,
like
that's
one
my opinion,
unified
but
group of
between
people.
all of us, you all my brother, and I love you guys.
Yeah.
Like I say, another thing, I learned since I'm a little kid, I can never love a car, I can never love a house. I love you guys, I love God, and I love you guys. Why? Because God's a jealous God. And that's the thing we don't say. God's a loving God. We can only love Him, and we can only love people.
Yeah.
No material, but here, oh, I love my house, I love my car, I love my wall, I love this. You know, things don't work like that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the day we say, we want the blessing. How you going to get blessed? You know, there's people judging me. You see how I look. But I like to look like that. You know why? Because I let people to see what.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I teach my kids, it's not what you know, what you say, what you know. You know, I work with a lot of people, you know, educated. And I only went 2 years to school, but no feeling high school. No feeling, first grade, you know. And they say to me, how many years you went to university? You know how I know the university from outside. The pictures. You know?
Yeah.
The pictures. That's the only one I know. But sometimes I deal with so many people, so much education, and I look and I say, that's why you went to university? Now you're on debt, you have to pay all the money back to university, you're on debt. I met a guy 60 years old.
Student
They
loans.
owe $250,000 in the bank and hold. How much you owe? I say, I'm in debt. But with God. I'm in debt.
Where are you from originally?
Well, let's tell you this story. My family moved from Israel to Spain. From Spain, they kicked out of there, I went to Turkey. From Turkey, Salvador. And now, look, I don't know.
So you grew up in El Salvador?
Yeah, after 10 years old. But like I say, we had everything. We don't have no problem. We grew up the land, we were blessed. Civil war came, guerrillas, the Nicaragua, we grew up on the border. So I don't have no choice. I told my mother, I have two choices. Stay here and die. I make decision when I was 10 years old. I tell you, when I swim in the Rio Bravo, if I drowned and died, I was the happiest man. At least I tried. With my shoes, and it's easy to talk, but when you swim the Rio Bravo, with the clothes, and they sink you, especially you come out here, you go here, you're coming out like 2 miles down the road. So that's what happened over here. Most of the people we deal with, we're through with that. We just talk. And life is so beautiful, but the most part is to enjoying it is we have to thank God. It's like I tell my kids, people say, thank you, God. I say, no, it's God, thank you. Because then first we put the thanks to thank God, and God always be first. And we put God first, everything we have, we speak the same language. Yeah. But when we put God after, anything to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Janet, you had something to say. So there's a few, we didn't even get to talk about the army or whatever. We'll just maybe quickly finish up here a little bit about how the kind of various compromises that were reached between, the religious and the secular Zionists at the early formation of the state. But I think it's also important, when we talk about the state and what is the nature of the state, what's the mission, like what's the perspective that we have, but what's also the perspective that other people have, like the other countries. When they look at Israel, do they see a secular state? Absolutely not. The opposition that the Catholic Church had to Israel at the beginning was primarily based upon the fact that the idea of Jews going back to Israel and reestablishing the state was in direct contradiction to everything that they were preaching for thousands of years, that the Jews were gone and they ain't coming back, The Jews themselves, Ben Gurion had said this, and even to this day, Naftali Bennett said it, a few weeks ago. What's our deed to the land? What's our claim to the land? The historical claim is the Torah, So ironically, we have this claim to the land via the Torah, and God promising it to Abraham, etc. And your kids are going to have the land, and again, that theme is hammered out over and over and over again in the Torah. Yet there's this claim to try to divest any religious significance to the state.
That's one reason also why Netanyahu wants Israel classified as a state, because he wants it known that it belongs to the Jews.
Well, if that'll really solve the problem of anybody's ignorance, then that's fine. I just don't think. I don't think there's any. I never knew there was any doubt about it. I really didn't. Now there's people that want to, for their own reasons, deny it, and I don't think you're going to stop them from that just by enacting a law. I really don't.
It'll help.
I don't know that it'll. Well, I'm not against it. I don't. It doesn't. I don't know that it matters.
When they had the Declaration, May 14th, 1948, Declaration of Independence of Israel, Friday afternoon, the exact text of the Declaration was also a compromise. It doesn't mention God in the text.
But it does mention as a Jewish state, doesn't it?
Well, yes, but it doesn't mention God at all.
Okay.
What it does mention is Tzur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel, which, because it has that ambiguity, everyone was happy with it. I mean, that's a negotiation that they had. Because it could refer to God, it could refer maybe to the IDF, it could refer to who knows what it could refer to. Rock of Israel could be ambiguous. Sure. Example of how they came to agreement. The status quo law. So this is the agreements at the inception of the state. So in 1948, they already had the agreement Ben-Gurion had with the chief rabbinate with regards to the 400 students that were studying in Israel, full-time in Yeshiva. That exemption of full-time Yeshiva students still exists to this day. There's a law right now called the Tal Law, which is going to basically undo that. You have quotas, limitations on that. It's a very, very, very divisive and hotly debated, and also very sensitive topic. Like
the law was pending like last 5 or 6 years.
It's been pending for a while, exactly.
So it will be there for a while.
It's a problem because, well, on one hand, there's Netanyahu. Ben-Gurion wrote in a letter. He says, "Hey, is it fair that one mother will have her son die in battle in defense of the state, while the other mother will have his son, in a peaceful environment of the yeshiva studying? Is that fair?" I think it's a legitimate question. I don't think it's an easily answerable question. So when we talk, maybe I guess we'll have to do some other time about what's the arguments to and for this law, and what's the Torah perspective, what's the rationale of both sides.
It's not pacifism, right? It's just interruption of their studies. Is that why there isn't?
I'm sorry?
Is that the rationale for the exemption?
No, the rationale was that if someone is going to declare that Torah tohu manato, that's what it's called, Torah tohu manato, Torah is his craft. If that's what someone's going to declare, that's what they do all day, then they're exempt. Why they came to the agreement, that's debated as well. There are those that say, even though this is, I think this is revisionist history, but there are those that like Yair Lapid. So he's at the forefront of the effort to try to undo this law, the status quo law. And he always claims, even though I haven't found any reference to the accuracy, the historicity of this claim, but he claims that the reason why this law was established was because the Holocaust decimated the vibrant yeshiva world that existed in Europe, and as an effort to rehabilitate that world to a small degree, they said, let the 400 students, let them build something. But now it's such a powerful force in Israeli culture, doesn't need to be, have any favoritism.
What's the length of
a 4-year exemption?
3 years.
That's it.
3 years.
3 years.
Give them like going to college. Give them a 4-year exemption, let them study. Then they go.
So,
that's the problem. Isn't it lifelong?
Well, yeah, but we're compromising here. Of course I know.
When I was in Israel in 1972, I went about 3 days after the Lod Airport massacre, and I was talking to the Israeli people and my friends over there and all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And the sentiment against the yeshiva types was so terrific. So here we are sending our boys up there, they're getting killed all the time, they finally won the war. And these guys said they won the war because they were sitting there during the war reading. That was the sentiment.
That like I said, the argument is that it's not fair, and it's why should one Jew be placed in the line of fire while the other one is protected by the the edifice of the yeshiva? That's one of the arguments.
Aren't there some that take the position that at wartime that they leave the yeshiva and they find religious or scriptural or some sort of thing that when we're threatened, we have to stop.
So one of the arguments from a Torah perspective, so like I would call this the religious Zionist argument, why everyone has to join the army is because it's called a mechemes mitzvah, a mitzvah war. In Jewish warfare, there's different classifications of wars. There are wars that are done merely to increase territory. That would be called a mechemes reshus, a voluntary war. And that you have, I guess, whoever's conscripted, whoever's part of the army, they join that. A mandatory war doesn't make any distinctions, and the Talmud says that if someone is a husband and a wife, a groom and a bride, they leave their wedding ceremony, everyone joins the war effort. So the argument would be that if joining the war effort in Israel is to be classified as a Milchemetz Mitzvah, as a mandatory war, then everyone has to join. That's the that's one of the arguments.
And
Absolutely.
they would fulfill, yeah.
What would they do?
I'm sorry?
If they're not trained, what would they do?
No,
That's why they have
they would
reserves.
probably, I guess, train, as quickly as they could, or whatever.
A lot of these ideas are. Thank you. A lot of these ideas are being debated. Unfortunately, we didn't finish, so maybe we'll have some. We'll have an opportunity to actually discuss these in depth at some other time.
One other thing.
Yes, one other thing.
Take a chapter of the Torah and talk about it in the next class and find out the intricate secrets or what have you that's encapsulated in the Torah.
Of what?
Chapter, whatever. Chapter.
Which chapter? Whichever.
Is there one you like in particular?
Yes.
Which one?
Well, I like the one with the Exodus.
We could do that. I think that's well. We already have, I think, schedules set in place for.
This curriculum is already scheduled.
But we'll add it to the curriculum. Absolutely. Future curriculums.
Next week is Q&A. So,
Oh, Q&A. Fantastic. So maybe we could.
Let's adjudicate how good an investment gold is.
Terrible. You like it?
No.
Terrible.
I think it's a horrible long-term investment.